Hi there. Are you taking the November 2nd digital SAT in 2024 and you want a little help understanding what might be on the test? Well, luckily, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in this video. I'm Kristina, the owner and founder of Ivy Lounge Test Prep, and I help high schoolers all over the globe, just like you, dramatically raise their SAT and ACT test scores. And I have a few ideas after 15 years of doing this, what I believe will be on the November 2nd test. So I'm going to do 10 of them. I'm going to start with the reading, writing things that I know are going to show up in those modules. And then I'm going to end with 5 math items that I'm pretty darn sure are also going to show up. Ready? Because I certainly am. Okay, so the first type of question that is absolutely going to show up, because it actually shows up on every single digital SAT exam, are what I call these sentence completion questions. So in each of your 2 reading, writing modules, you are going to have the beginning of them be these sentence completions. Basically, it's like a little paragraph, a sentence or 2, and then there's a blank, and you're supposed to pick the vocab word that fits it. Now, for a lot of people, this is really intuitive. Like they're not like what we used to call SAT words from, years past. These are words that you probably use in your everyday language, but maybe they have multiple meanings. So you're probably familiar with most of them already. But what I think is going to happen on the November 2nd test is there are going to be a couple of these sentence completion questions where you cannot lie on just your gut instinct. Like you're gonna actually have to use a strategy because what you think is your gut instinct or what sounds right to you is gonna give you a wrong answer. So let me show you an example of what I mean. Okay, so here's an example of a sentence completion question where the logic might flummox you if you're just going on sound or instinct. So we read the actual text and we say the word blank when we get to the underline, right? So handedness, a preferential use of either the right or left hand, typically is easy to observe in humans. Because this trait is present but less blank in many other animals, animal behavior researchers often employ tasks specifically designed to reveal individual animals' preferences for a certain hand or paw. So the trick for sentence completions is to have a strategy. I go into this way more in detail, my top 2 in my online course, which is the ultimate reading writing guide for the digital SAT. But here is the cliff notes of the one I think will help you the most, is you come up with your own word in the blank before you ever look at those answer choices, because you don't want to be influenced. Because I know most of my students, when they first like start just plugging in the answer choices into the blank, they're like, oh yeah, that could work, that could work. So don't get influenced. Instead, come up with your own word, and that might make sense. And then, and then you will have a much easier time of distinguishing which is the actual correct answer. For example, we would look at this sentence. Because this trait is present but less, I don't know, less noticeable, less observable, something like that, like less obvious in many other animals. Animal behavior researchers often employ specific tasks designed to reveal an individual animal's preference for certain hand or paw. So I came up with a couple words that I thought might have made sense. It's how I would have filled in the blank. And then when we look at actual answer choices, it's like, oh, well, I said like noticeable, observable. Well, recognizable is almost one of the exact same definitions as that. So I basically cut through the noise because I became clear on what I thought the meaning of that blank needed to be first. And then I compared the answer choices to what I came up with. So that is the first type of question. It's going to be the sentence completion questions, which you see them in every module, but they're going to be ones where specifically you got to use a strategy, because if you just go by sound or your gut, you're probably going to get it wrong. So the second type of question that is absolutely going to show up on the November 2nd digital SAT is a function or purpose of the underlined sentence question. Let me show you what I mean. I know you've seen this before. Okay, so here is a great example. So this is going to be in what I call like the general traditional reading question block. of questions that occur in every module. It's the grouping of usually about 5 or 6 questions that happens after sentence completions. And they might ask things about like main idea of this, or what is true about specific detail of the text. But this is one that comes up a lot, and I know you're going to see at least a few of them. And you see, first of all, a whole little sentence is underlined. And then we look at the question stem and it says, which choice best describes the function of the third sentence in the overall structure of the text? Okay, so now that you understand that you've seen this question type before, and you are definitely going to see it again on November 2nd, here's how you actually answer the what is the function or the purpose of the underlined sentence type question. So the hint here is we are not asking for a paraphrase. The text does not care what the actual sentence said. They don't want you to say it in different words. That's not what it's asking. Think of it like this. The test is asking you, like, if you were the writer, why would you waste your time thinking of and typing out that sentence? Like, how does it move the text along? What does it accomplish? So here are maybe some ideas of like what that could look like. Notice it never has to do with specific content. It has to do with things such as, did it explain or illustrate an example? Did it introduce an opposing idea? Did it form a conclusion about something? So we're looking for weird, vague sounding answers like those. That is what the function is. So again, that is the second type of question you're going to see on the November 2nd SAT, and that is, what is the function of the underlined sentence? So the third type of question that I absolutely know you're going to see, I know these are predictions, but I feel very confident about this. In the block of claims questions, so those are the questions that have to happen after like the general reading comprehension questions, you will definitely see one about undermining or weakening a claim. So let me show you an example so you will understand which question type this is talking about. Okay, so this is an example of a claims question, which is the one that asks about evidence, asks you about, illustrating an example, weakening, strengthening claims. You're definitely going to see one like this. So check out what the actual question is asking you right here, which is which finding, if true, would most directly weaken the student's hypothesis? So notice, this says the student's hypothesis, not necessarily the author who wrote this text's hypothesis, but you're going to read this little question stem first to understand what you're searching for before you then go and actually read the text, which is this part up here. Okay, so your task with these, right? So now that you understand what it's asking, first step, you got to figure out, well, what is the student's hypothesis, right? So you're going to be reading this, you're going to figure out what the student's hypothesis is. And then it's asking you for something that would most directly weaken. So like which fact, if we added it to that, would go against the evidence that the student built their idea, their hypothesis, their claim on. So you're trying to be the person to prove someone wrong, right? So that's what you have to do in this third type of question that you're definitely going to see on the November 2nd SAT, which is to figure out information or evidence that might undermine or weaken the author or the students or the scientists, whomever's claim, hypothesis, conclusion, etc. So hi there, I'm Kristina. I mentioned that I'm the owner and founder of Ivy Lounge Test Prep, and I help students all over the globe, just like you, dramatically raise their SAT and ACT test scores so they can get into the colleges of their dreams. So I now have a question for you, and that is, what do you hope is on the November 2nd digital SAT? Is there a specific question type that you would love to do? Or is there one that you're super not stoked about? Please write it in the comments below. And while you're at it, please just like this video and subscribe to my channel, and then you will always be the first to find out whenever I post my new videos. Okay, the fourth question type that I know is going to show up on this November 2nd digital SAT, because the digital SAT like loves this topic and I see it in pretty much every module, right? It's going to be a standard English convention question, aka grammar question, specifically on punctuation, which is like the most tested type of grammar in that block of questions, right? But it's going to be a comma question specifically about if a word or words is considered extra information or not. As you may recall, when you have some extra information, something that you don't need to have a complete sentence and know what the sentence is talking about, you can separate out that bit of extra information in a few ways, usually with commas, sometimes with dashes, sometimes with parentheses. Now, part of the ordeal is that you have to make a decision about if, in fact, the word or the words are considered extra, or if you really do need them for the sentence to make sense and be complete. Okay, so here is an example to show you what I am talking about and kind of what the clues are. Okay, so we know this is a grammar question because look at the question stem. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? Okay, and we look at these answer choices. Like, I'm not even going to read the text. I just want you to see how you know that this is what it's asking. You notice that the words are exactly the same, right? Carbon-13, and then there's like this parentheses, and there's a superscript 13 and big C. And so it has the same carbon-13 and the little parentheses, carbon-13 parentheses, like carbon-13 with the parentheses, right? With the little superscript 13 and a C. But notice how the answer choices are different, okay? So this one has a comma between the two. This one has no commas. Answer choice C has a comma before and after the parenthetical carbon-13. And then you've got answer choice D, which just has a comma after. That's a pretty darn big hint that what they're asking you to do is determine if literally just the, well, let me just do it, just the parentheses 13C, if that little bit is extra or not. So that is going to be the fourth thing that I know is going to show up on the November 2nd digital SAT is a comma question specifically about extra information. And of course, we would not have any digital SAT without transition word questions, which happen after the standard English convention questions, right? In every module, you'll have at least, as little as one or maybe a few of them. So you're going to have a transition word question, but I predict that you're going to have one on this specific test where you can't do the simple trick of, oh, I need a contrast, which not a continue, not a cause and effect. Let me look at my 4 answer choices. Which one is the contrast transition word? That is a nice trick. It works for a lot of them, but I bet you're going to get one where you're like, oh, I need a continue, but or you need one of those types of transition words. But then when you look at the answer choices, you're like, oh no, multiple of them are continue transition words. I'm going to actually have to get more specific about the meaning of them. So let me show you an example of what I mean. Okay, so here's an example of a transition word. And you'll know it's a transition word question because, well, first of all, they happen after the standard English convention questions in each module, but it literally has the same question stem every time. Which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? It's like they're telling you which chapter of the grammar book you needed to have learned to do this, right? Very generous of the digital SAT makers, the College Board, I might add. Okay, so when we look at these answer choices, I'm not even going to do this question with you. I just want to show you. We have afterwards, additionally, indeed, similarly, all 4 of those are continue words. Like literally all 4 of them are continue words, but there's different type of continue words. So you have to actually make a more nuanced and detailed distinction when you're working this question. So like afterwards is one of those continue words that tells you when something happens, like tomorrow, yesterday, first, next, then, afterward, like one of those. Additionally is one where you are talking about a topic, you say something about the topic, and then additionally, you're going to say a second different thing, but about the same topic. Indeed is going to be a transition word that emphasizes what you just said. And then similarly, now I know what a lot of you are thinking, like, isn't that the same as additionally? No, similarly is not. Similarly is I mention that there's a trait about this topic, and this second different subject also shares that same trait. Like additionally would be, my ruler is hot pink. Additionally, it's 12 inches long. Still talking about the ruler. Similarly would be, my ruler is hot pink. Similarly, second object entirely, my scissors are also hot pink. That would be similarly. So that is the fifth question that I absolutely know you are going to come across in the reading writing modules of the digital SAT this November 2nd. Now let's jump cut to math. Okay, first type of math question that I definitely know you're going to see in one or both of these modules. It's going to be a linear equation question. You always have linear equation questions, but I know you're going to run into one of these where you have to actually interpret what the slope and or the y-intercept of an equation actually means in a real world scenario. So let me show you an example of what this might look like. Okay, so here is an example. So Hannah deposited a fixed amount into her bank account each month. The function f of t equals 100 plus 25t gives the amount in dollars in Hannah's bank account after t monthly deposits. What is the best interpretation of 25 in this context? Well, so two things. One is the y-intercept and the slope are in the opposite order that you think they should be in. Normally we do y equals mx plus b, so it's like the slope x and then plus y-intercept. They reversed it. They have the one that doesn't have the variable first. So we have our y-intercept first, and then we have the 25t. So our slope is the 25. So they're asking you the interpretation of 25, the slope. Now, you know that the slope is always going to be the rate. So for every, whatever the t represents, your, whatever the y or the function represents will increase by the slope. For every monthly deposit, right, because t represents a monthly deposit, for every monthly deposit, the actual f of t, which is her bank account balance, increases because it's positive by 25. So that would be like your little ad libs of figuring that out. I go into more detail into all of this in my digital SAT math cram plan, which is part of my online course, the Ultimate Digital SAT Math Guide. I'll have links to them in the show notes, don't worry. But I literally show you ad libs of how to do this for the y-intercept and for the slope in any situation so you can make sense of it. So that is going to be the first math topic that I know is going to show up is a linear equation problem where specifically you have to interpret the y-intercept or the slope in a real world scenario and make sense of them. Okay, so the seventh question that I know is going to show up on this November 2nd digital SAT is going to be a system of equations. We always have system of equations, right? But bear with me. It's going to be like a line with a non-line. So maybe a parabola and a line, or maybe a different function that is nonlinear and a line, okay? And it will ask you to find the solution point, like x comma y, or maybe it'll just ask you like how many solutions there are. So let me show you an example so you are aware of what this kind of looks like. So here is a nice example from one of the linear non-adaptive practice tests. We have y equals 2x squared minus 21x plus 64, which is a parabola, right? It's a quadratic equation. And then we have y equals 3x plus a, which is a line, right? So it says, given the system of equations, in the given system of equations, a is a constant, i.e. it is an actual number. It's not a variable, but they're just kind of being, you know, douchey and not telling us what a is. Maybe they will ask us what it is. The graph of the equation in the given system intersect at exactly 1 point. What is the value of x? Now, what I would do would be, look, you've got y equals equation, we have y equals other equation, set them equal to each other. And in this way, you can figure out what the x value is. Now you're going to need to make sure that it only has one x, so you're probably going to have to adjust this accordingly, but you get the point. The other option, if you get one of these equations where they actually just write the equations out, you can literally use your Desmos calculator and like, boom, the graph is like right there. You can see how many solutions there are. If you see, where the two functions cross, you can go find it. Another hint about these sort of things. Sometimes you might get 3 functions in a graph. I've seen one where there's like a line, a parabola, and then like a circle. And then it asks you what the solution is for all of them. And so this is a little hint, and that is a solution for like 3 different functions. It would be if there is any point or points where all 3 of those things cross. So it's not just, oh, well, 2 of them crossed here and, function 2 and function 3 crossed here, and then all 3 of them crossed here. So I have 1, 2, 3. No, there are not 3 solutions. Only the one where all 3 of them cross would be considered a solution. So that is the 7th type of question you're probably going to see on November 2nd, which is a system of nonlinear equations. The 8th question type that I'm pretty sure is going to show up would be a circle on the coordinate plane. Like literally, you would need to, like based on a drawing or based on information they gave you about the center and the radius, you are going to need to maybe come up with the circle equation, or based on the circle equation, you're going to have to know things about the circle or figure out which of the graphs represents that equation. But you're going to need to know the coordinate plane circle formula and be able to understand what it means. So here's an example of that kind of question. Okay, so in this practice question, we have the equation x squared plus parentheses y minus 1, the quantity squared, equals 49, represents a circle A. Circle B is obtained by shifting circle A down 2 units in the xy plane. Which of the following equations represents circle B? So this is an easy question if you understand how this equation works, and you're probably omitting or guessing. Well, you should never omit, but you're probably guessing if you don't know how this works. So basically, the way that a circle equation works is that you have the first parentheses would be x minus the x value of the center point, the quantity squared, and then y minus the y coordinate of the center point, the quantity squared, and that's equal to the radius squared. So I know a couple things. Okay, 49 is the radius squared. My radius is 7, right? So I know the size of this circle. So all we're doing though is shifting down. So if I'm just taking something and shifting it down, like that's not going to affect the radius. So I know it's definitely going to need to equal 49, right? Now the other thing is, over here, this x squared, it wasn't x minus anything, right? So that means, well, the x coordinate of the center point must be 0. And over here, it's y minus 1. So the y coordinate of my center point is 1. So 0, comma 1 is my center for my 7-unit radius circle. So basically, if I want to move this down, that's not going to change the x value at all, right, of the center. I mean, it's not going left or right, just going down. So I shouldn't change this x squared. So now I'm looking at D or I'm looking at B, right? And then here's the other thing. So I know the center point is 0, comma 1. If I move that down 2, so positive 1, now to 0, now to negative 1, my new center point is 0, comma negative 1. Right? So y minus negative 1, the quantity squared, becomes y plus 1, the quantity squared. So D is going to be your answer here. The whole point is that you need to understand how the formula for a circle on the coordinate plane works and what the parts mean, so that you're not confused about any of this and you can just quickly like cross things out and make decisions. So that is the 8th type of question that I'm pretty sure you will encounter on November 2nd, which is a circle on the coordinate plane. The 9th type of question that I'm pretty darn sure you're going to encounter on November 2nd is going to be a tricky percent question. Now, there are percentages on all the modules of the math section of pretty much all the digital SATs, but I think that you're going to need to know the difference between like percent of and percent greater than. Okay, let me show you what I mean. Okay, so in this question, we have 210 is p% greater than 30. What is the value of p? So this is what you need to understand. The word of means multiply, and if it is a percent greater than, then you're not doing the same thing, okay? So here is a quick example. Say you have, there's one number, it's 100. And then there's another number, 140. Okay, so now 140 would literally be 140% of 100, right? But how much percent greater is it? It's only 40% greater, right? Because it's like you think of, okay, 100, 140, there's 40 greater. So then what percent of that additional part of my original is it? The change over the original. So does that make sense? So here's a cool little rule of thumb. If something is like 110% of, that means it's 10% greater than. You basically take the percentage of amount, you subtract 100 from it, and that is the percent greater. So let's look at this question again. So if I were going to do, like, pretend I had 210 is p% of 30. Well, it's 700% up. I would have done 210 equals some number x over 100 times 30 to figure that out. I would have come up with it's 700%, it's 7 times 30. But it didn't ask of, it asked greater than. What is the amount that is greater? 210 minus 30, well, it's 180 greater. So that is what percent of the 30? That's 600% greater than 30. Does that make sense? So, and that just kind of proved the point of the percentage of, it's 700% of, like 210 is 7% of 30, but you subtract 100 from that, it's 600% greater than 30. So tricky percents where you actually need to know the difference between percent of versus a percent greater. So again, if you don't know that inside and out, please look it up. It is obviously in my math course and my math cram plan, but check it out. And finally, the 10th type of question that I'm pretty sure is going to show up on this test. You're going to have parabolas, but you always have parabolas, right? Big whoop. But this is different. You're going to need to understand how the factors of the quadratic equation of the parabola relates to the actual roots or solutions, okay? You might even have to find a place where this function, this parabola, has a maximum or a minimum. And the hint there would be, okay, well, you've got two factors. Each of those show you two different solutions. And the midpoint, right, the axis of symmetry, that would be where your max or your min would occur. So you would average the x values of your two roots, boom, x value of your axis of symmetry, which would be the place where the maximum or a minimum would occur. So let me show you an example. Okay, let's check out this question. So it says f of x is equal to x minus 10 times the quantity x plus 13. Notice they wrote it out for you in factored form already. So the function f is defined by the given equation. For what value of x does f of x reach its minimum? Okay, so the trick here is like looking at each of these factors and determining, well, then what is the root? So the way it works when you have a quadratic is the root or the solution or the x-intercept or the zero. All four of those things mean the same thing, right? The place where the parabola cuts through the x-intercept. And it is directly related to, though not identical to, the factors or the things in parentheses. So the way it works is, so like x minus 10, what would the x have to be to make this parentheses equal to 0? So usually it's just like the opposite number that you see here. So this one's negative 10, right? It's x minus 10. So then your x value itself would be positive 10. So you've got one root at x equals positive 10. So same logic with the second one, right? It's x plus 13. So when x equals negative 13, that would be the other place where it crosses the x-axis. So you've got positive 10, negative 13. So we literally average those two numbers, right? So let's do that. Positive 10, negative 13, that's negative 3 divided by 2, so negative 3 halves. That is going to be the place in the middle, i.e. the axis of symmetry, which would be the place where if we have a parabola facing upwards, it would be a minimum. If we had a parabola facing downwards, it would be a maximum. And look, we literally have the negative 3 halves right here in answer choice D. So that is the 10th question that I really just think is going to show up on this November 2nd SAT. And that is a parabola where you need to understand how these factors relate to the roots themselves. So that, my friends, are the 10 questions that I am pretty sure you are going to come across this November 2nd. And as always, like, good luck on the test. If you need further help, then check out my ebooks and courses. I've got one for the reading writing. I've got one for the math. They're self-paced. They include cram plans in them. And there's just all the content and strategies you need to know to drastically raise your scores. So check them out in the link below.